Welcome everybody to another episode of the You're Better Off Knowing podcast. Today we want to have a conversation about how to establish good measurement beyond marketing teams. So we want to discuss how finance teams can become integral partners for incrementality approaches. This one is not just for marketing scientists, so to everyone out there from the usual audience, feel free to share this with your colleagues in controlling and accounting teams. And I could not wish for better guests on these topics. First, we have Ian Whittaker. He's a leading industry expert and thought leader. He's the founder of the advisory firm Liberty Sky Advisors and twice City AM Analyst of the Year. And next, we have Michael Askins. He is the marketing analytics principal at Farfetch. And last but not least, we have Gabriella Munro, marketing science partner from the UK at Meta. And at Meta, we call Gabriella Gabi, so we'll use that in this podcast too, if okay with you. So can you all please give a quick intro about yourself? Ian, maybe let's start with you.
Sure, thanks, Torsten. So my background is I was an equities research analyst working for an investment bank. I did that for 20 years. I covered the global media and tech sectors during that time. And 5 years ago, I set up my own firm, Liberty Sky Advisors, who advise, consult, and also as well do public speaking.
Great. Looking forward to your insights. Michael, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Michael and I'm marketing analytics principal at Farfetch. I come from a media measurement background, working in the agency world previously for 5 years. And now I lead marketing analytics and measurement at Farfetch, which is a luxury online retail and tech company where I'm responsible for the technical side of measurement alongside embedding it within the wider organization, including with finance and leadership teams.
Brilliant. Excited to have you. And Gabi, what about you?
So I have been with Meta and marketing science for about 6 years now. And I am a statistician by heart, but I have worked across what feels like most industries by now, fine art auction and agencies, international organizations, telecom, etc., etc. So very excited to be here today.
Thanks so much for joining. So yeah, let's get this started. Usually marketing teams and companies have a certain budget, which they are then in charge of allocating to different channels and measures. And that overall budget that they allocate is often determined by finance teams. But the ROI then for all the different measures is evaluated by the marketing teams again. So why aren't finance teams actually more involved? Maybe Ian, with your consultancy background, you can try to explain that a little bit.
Sure. So I think you have a combination of factors here. I think a fundamental one at the end of the day is that finance teams don't really understand marketing, the concepts, and that really has a number of implications. One is inherently what it builds is a lack of trust. Really a lack of trust over what marketing teams deliver to their finance teams, a lack of trust to see whether actually the business benefits that come from that marketing investment, and also as well a lack of trust often in the process in which marketing teams have arrived at their conclusions. Now, at the end of the day, like with anything, often what lack of trust boils down to is really a lack of communications that really goes on. And as I said, that's really exacerbated by you have two functions there that they're not naturally going to be logical, let's call them logical allies. You wouldn't expect, for example, a marketing person to be necessarily clued up on everything to do with finance and vice versa with finance people as well. Another element you also have here as well is, quite frankly, the accounting treatment. Marketing is seen is treated on the accounting standards as a cost. It's not treated as an investment. And again, that has a number of implications. The first thing is if finance teams need to meet their profit numbers in a short amount of time, often the easiest way to do that is to cut the marketing budget because the drop through to profits is immediate and it's close to 100%. But also as well, there's something else there as well. It's because of this accounting treatment, inherently what it tends to move teams towards is a view, again, that marketing is a cost and not an investment. And the way that finance teams tend to see costs are really things to be minimized, whereas investments are those to be maximized. So you've really got a variety of different elements there.
Yeah, I see. And Michael, do you want to add to that from your experience at Farfetch, maybe?
Yeah. So I think, a bit about my general experience, and then maybe specifically about Farfetch, is that I think Ian makes a really important point around investment and how that investment has to be something that is forward looking as opposed to something that is completely immediate. And so I think, it all comes down to that alignment between teams. I think something we're really great at Farfetch, and something we've been working on, is really bringing the finance team and the marketing team together. I've been to a few marketing style events in the last few years where people say people in marketing need to speak the language of the CFO. And that's great. And that's half of it. I think the other half of it is that people in finance also need to speak the language of marketing a bit. And when you bring those two things together, that's when you start to get into that virtuous feedback loop of using measurement and using finance and using marketing tactics to start to do what, I guess, from a marketing analyst point of view, we are here to do, which is to increase our business's top line at the end of the day. I think we've been on that education journey at Farfetch, and there have been moments where we've really broken through and got through to the next stage in terms of really thinking about how we actually think about that marketing investment, how we measure it, and how we align between finance and the actual marketing, and from my side, the analytics team, to ensure we're creating that structure of incentives that grows the business and makes it more efficient.
Yeah, so also copying that communication is at the core, at the foundation of all of that. Now, one of our favorite topics on this podcast for various episodes is incrementality measurement. And you both are working with finance teams to get a new perspective on marketing investments, and incrementality plays a big role in that. So can you share a bit on how that works, how you brought incrementality in, maybe starting with you, Michael?
Sure. I think the first place that I would go on in that conversation is we've lived in an industry or lived with an industry where for the last 25 years, still a lot of conversations have been structured by deterministic and heuristics. So what that means is that when you see a certain number that would say comes from last click measurement, that's something that in the first place and at the surface level aligns quite well with the way finance thinks, or generally finance teams think, because when you're doing accountancy and that's your discipline, you are dealing with deterministic and numbers that actually are pretty solid and are straight up. But the process of working around incrementality actually works with confidence intervals and probabilities. So I think in terms of like the way that, like, talking around Farfetch and the way that we've gone on that journey is really sort of thinking about the opportunity costs. When you start to talk about conversions that would not have happened anyway without those advertising touch points, I think we've had meetings where we've been talking through that, and there's been those light bulb moments where we've actually started to think properly about causality and the way that we say, we want our advertising to change people's behavior instead of we want to show ads to people who would have converted anyway. I think once you get into those kind of opportunity costs and the way that will structure your future investment, I think that is when you get into that properly good place of, I think, sort of me as an analyst being able to convince finance and marketing coming together to really think through causality. So yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the proximity for us within Farfetch. We have a really close relationship between our finance and our marketing team. We're in all the weekly meetings together. We have lots of weekly meetings. Whenever we're talking through all this stuff, we're very much aligned. And so I think we as Farfetch went through an acquisition with Coupang, the Korean FMCG e-commerce retailer, which is a very numbers focused business and has always had that alignment between marketing and finance. So that real day-to-day focus on the way we are investing and getting as many customers in the most efficient way is really important. So we have those conversations the whole time, and we are completely aligned over the way we use last click measurement, especially related to stuff like remarketing or branded searches. And so, yeah, I think we're really in a good place in terms of building that incentive structure where we're thinking about what grows the business in terms of the way we might measure and the way we look into the future with our budgeting and everything else in terms of the way we plan marketing going forward.
Great. That sounds good. Gabi, maybe you can add a little bit from your perspective, from our perspective. You were part of Michael's journey, how to transform measurement to incrementality at Farfetch, but maybe also at other clients. So what is the convincing point for many clients or finance teams in particular?
Yeah, for sure. So yes, I've had the privilege of working with Farfetch and being part of this journey. And firstly, I'd like to say how rare it is to be involved with or to interact with finance team as a marketeer and as a marketing scientist. We've always talked about that relationship as an important one, but it is quite rare that it actually happens and that we align and we include each other and we take decisions and talk about marketing. So one of the realizations working with Farfetch in particular was something that Michael mentioned, which is a difference in language. I think within marketing these days, we're used to talking about attribution and lift studies and MMMs and measurement frameworks, etc. Whereas my experience from working with finance teams is that they don't necessarily know, maybe not even what a lift study is. They haven't maybe even challenged attribution. It's the metric they use. End of story. They haven't maybe reflected on what is it actually and is it an accurate view of the value of marketing. So for me, sitting down with the finance team at Farfetch, what was interesting was how valuable it was to go back to basics and align on the language, align on what they want to achieve, what we want to achieve, what marketing wants to achieve, and actually realize that it's the same thing. We just maybe have approached it slightly differently. Another realization working with finance teams is that they are typically really smart people who value accuracy. They want to get it right, essentially. So I think what was valuable working with Farfetch and the finance team at Farfetch was that we did our homework before we interacted early days. We did a lot of analysis on previous campaigns. We compared what attribution reported with what lift studies reported. We had data in front of us that showed how campaigns were measured in slightly different ways and told different stories depending on the measurement approach, etc. So using data that to align us was the key, I think, for aligning going forward.
That's good. And I think what you mentioned, what Michael also mentioned, so things in marketing are often pretty complex, like how attribution, how modeling works. But the idea of incrementality is pretty simple, actually. It's identifying those conversions that would not have happened anyway. And Ian, in your intro, you also mentioned that there's often the trust issue from finance teams toward what marketing does. So does that help somehow that with incrementality you have something that is actually very straightforward, it's very accurate, but also easy to understand without a statistics background?
Sure, it definitely helps. I think, there are a couple of other things that also need to be borne in mind as well, is that if you come from a finance background, particularly if you're involved, for example, in the building of models and so forth, what you sort of often focus on is really the inputs and the process rather than necessarily the outputs. And what I mean by that is that, to put it bluntly, any model can be manipulated to give you the outcome that you want. So really what a lot of people are looking for is they're looking for essentially the strength of how the assumptions have been looked at, of how people have really gone through in terms of maybe scenario analysis, looking at potential of other alternatives to the numbers they've come up with as well. Because again, I mean, it won't obviously be the same for marketing teams and so on. But in the marketing industry, what you get a lot of is people will throw out research and says, well, this proves that X is Y and this is great and this should be the final word on the subject. And if you're looking at things from a finance standpoint, you go, well, that's absolutely great. But unless I can fully trust, I don't necessarily sort of need to go through the way that you've reached your conclusions, but I need to be able to trust how you've actually reached them and to make sure that you've gone through a solid process. Unless I actually have that trust, there is always going to be a discount that's applied to any result that you come out with. Because quite frankly, what people will say is, well, that's great, you've come out with this sort of result. Sort of, I understand sort of this justifies the case for investment, but I don't feel comfortable defending this. I don't feel comfortable actually sort of putting the budget on the line if I'm not entirely comfortable with how you've reached that conclusion. I think there's also as well something else I'd say is that sometimes what you can get, and it comes back to before to what Michael was saying about the light bulb movement, is you can get external factors as well that cause finance teams to go, yeah, actually now we can see the value of marketing. For example, during the inflation crisis of 2022, 2023, for many firms, what they realized was it was actually marketing that enabled them to get price increases through to their consumers. And what you had then was really a vast and planned experiment showing the value of marketing when it came to advertisers. And for many finance teams, that was a light bulb moment there. So, I think what you have here with sort of, again, to come back, and Michael's example was very sort of interesting here, and also as well what Gabby said, is that the more that finance teams understand the process, they don't necessarily have to get involved in the details, but they trust what you do and they trust the way that you work, then that will build up a lot more confidence within the finance teams.
Okay, cool. So the concept of incrementality is relatively straightforward, and we also have seen now how important it is to involve finance teams deeply to change actually the perspective on marketing and get the most out of it. But it's usually not a thing where you need to convince a team and then you work together. What happens after the initial step, when we have hopefully agreed to focus on incrementality and return metrics instead of pure cost perspectives, what needs to happen then? What are the next steps? Ian, maybe again from your perspective.
Yeah, again, I think if you look at sort of actual practical steps, really a key challenge here is how you adapt current systems. I mean, bear in mind that people have a very limited amount of time sort of when it comes to these things. And that's limited amount of time really to spend on the process, and also as well a limited amount of patience. So I think one thing is, do not expect quick radical results. I think when it comes to sort of what you're offering in terms of being able to say, sort of explain things, realize this is going to be a slow process, that you will have to walk through finance teams multiple times probably in order for them to understand sort of what's going on. And also as well, again, sort of the whole idea of regular meetings, communication, explaining what you're doing. It's again really sort of building up to this whole idea of building trust between the teams, so that essentially sort of both teams understand where the others are coming from. I think if you do that, and then sort of as again, expect things to be incremental, what will happen over time is you will find that radical change. But what I would say is do not expect anything sort of immediately to come through.
So advice for patience. Michael, as it's your core job to implement incrementality at Farfetch, can you share your journey a little bit from initially introducing the concept to actually implementing it?
Yeah, sure. I think I'd like to sort of briefly, I think you've raised a really interesting point about the concept of the incrementality being relatively straightforward, which I do agree when you think about it's about the causality of marketing actually convincing people. The actual measurement of it tends not to be straightforward. I think whenever I'm going into a project of trying to measure the incrementality of a channel, a group of channels, on marketing as a whole, I'm always thinking about Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Fooled by Randomness. And so I think analysts, as from an analyst point of view, you need to just always be aware of the randomness that happens within our world, and that actually you can see within the data that we see about people buying things. So my job as an analyst is to sort of seek out the signal from that randomness, and then actually use it to bring it into our actual business planning processes. And I think the insight that I've really learned is that I think with incrementality or causal measurement, shock therapy doesn't really work. I think it's a step-by-step thing. It's a journey that we take everyone. If it did just work straight away, then I'm not sure I'd be in with a job anyway, because of the complexity of it. So I'm happy for it to be complex. But so to start with, I think it comes about actually having that alignment and starting off with alignment between marketing and finance, and owning that measurement journey together, and that measurement agenda, I guess, would be the way I put it. And then you can think about, how do we take this stage by stage? And initially, you cannot always do incrementality measurement everywhere, is something we realize. So how do we do measurement, whether that's based on different tools such as MMM or incrementality experiments, whether that's in-platform or geo experiments? How do we do that and then learn with everything else? So we need to look at the way our incrementality aligns with our other metrics, so we can make those decisions about, at the very least, informed by incrementality to start, before bringing it into a more like holistically incremental in your measurement. So yeah, I think we start off by basically creating that system of incentives by talking with finance, having all those people in the room, and then building that culture. I think probably I'd always say culture first, tools second. I think it's something I've seen a lot in my career, is people throwing money at tools and not building the culture. It has to be the culture first. And I think that's something we've done really well at Farfetch, of actually being in those meetings and organizing that culture. And then, yeah, I think it's about working through those tests and thinking about, what's the hypothesis and what's the action. I think working with senior leadership and finance, they love to see what's the question you're asking, and they love to see what's the thing of action that you're doing. And that, I think, comes back to a point I made slightly earlier about future facing in your testing and your analysis. I think something that we see a lot is a lot of analysts end up in the sort of marketing sense, end up just focusing on explaining the past. I think we only explain the past to try and optimize and act better in the future. So that has to be always our goal, is how do we think about our future decisions? And that, I think, works incredibly well when you bring that sort of theory to finance and thinking about investment. And yeah, so I think it's about attribution, working out what it's doing wrong and working out how you build it in the future, and then working with the team to build those shared systems and spreadsheets. I think measurement, like I sit in the marketing team, but measurement is something for everyone, and it aligns across different teams. And hopefully we can go for Farfetch. We have commercial teams, we have finance teams. I think marketing measurement, media measurement, the customer journey isn't simple. It applies to all these different things, whether it's how much money you're spending on media, what you're doing in terms of pricing, what you're doing as a discount. All these things come together. So for me, marketing measurement is something for everyone. But I think in terms of specifically finance and marketing aligning, I think it's really about being future facing is my sort of usual way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And you mentioned culture over tools, which I also like very much. But in the end, there's usually, or often from my experience, also a lot of different tools that need some sort of adjustment or need embedding into the overall process. So how complex was it for you?
Yeah. So I'd say culture, not culture over tools, culture's first, tools second. Yeah. So the tools are still, from marketing measurement, as I was talking about earlier, it's still, it's a technical thing. It involves some quite difficult technical and statistical problems. But I think it's about having the alignment of the culture first and then working out the tools second. And yeah, I think part of that cultural alignment is accepting the tools are different to, like, attribution heuristics and actually working with what are the outputs and like how do the outputs that we verify from our experimentation or from our decisions in the past do we actually use in the future. So at the end of the day, I think there's no that like incrementality measurement does not circle around complete certainty, and that's why we need to be aware that there are probabilities and we are dealing with probabilities, but that if we are good with those probabilities and are aware of them, that can allow us to make those better decisions. So I think that's the sort of place where marketing, where finance has to come to meet marketing, is the less certainty, and then we have to meet them on sort of being future facing and thinking about it in terms of investment.
Yeah. And Gabi, you have supported Michael on Farfetch's journey to incrementality. So can you share a bit what we did, how we consulted, what can platforms actually do to help?
Yeah, so what made it easier for me was that the marketing team at Farfetch already understood the difference between attribution and incrementality, and we were definitely aligned around the challenges that attribution only represents, and that the best way forward is to move away from an attribution only framework. So what we did was early on, I'm trying to think how far back this is, going back 10 months perhaps, we decided to start to do something about those challenges and discuss and explore ways to overcome those challenges and move towards a more robust measurement framework, which meant that early days we tried to quantify that gap, which is actually a fairly straightforward process for advertisers to run experiments because they sit on the data already. If you have experimental data at hand, you can easily compare what a lift study or an experiment tells you about the value from those campaigns versus what attribution tells you. And just by simply comparing the two, you can quantify that gap, and you can start building an understanding of how that relationship between attribution and incrementality perhaps changes across campaigns, across markets, times of the year, etc. So that was something we did quite early on, just to get a sense for what the attribution gap looked like and what solutions could be suitable for adjusting for that gap, where there was multipliers to calibrate the model, or if there was another approach that was better. So in the past year, we've done a lot of that type of analysis, had lots of discussions around the best way to deal with that gap. And then with Michael on board, I'm just super excited to see how we've gone from theory to practice just within a few months of implementing a measurement framework that is purely based on incrementality. And it's been a joy to be part of.
Great. And I hear the journey is also not yet finished. So maybe to both of you, what do you think still needs to be done to complete the journey?
Yeah, sure. I guess I can start. I don't think the journey will ever be finished. So, which again is if you're a marketing analyst, is good for your job prospects. But yeah, I think in terms of thinking about causal measurement, I look in the industry and all the exciting things going on. I think there's just going to be more and more development in this area. I think people are thinking a lot more about causality in the world of analytics in general, and especially within marketing analytics. So I think we're going to get more and more ways and more innovative ways of measuring and actually trying to bring causality that we can actually bring in and actually use to actually impact our business, that we can translate those interesting analytics tools and methods into that sort of into actually thinking about our profit, our forecasting, and our capital allocation. So I think from my side, I'm really excited about that. I think there is always the challenge of that sometimes there isn't a signal to be taken from the data. So I'm definitely interested to think about over the next few years of how for certain channels or for certain markets where we aren't seeing much of a signal that can allow us to do incrementality measurement, how do we actually do that in the longer term? Do we need to change up our spending? Is it possible at all? So I think that's an area that I'm really interested in. So yeah, I think, lots to be done. like we're going to continue iterating, hopefully for a long while on this subject.
Great.
And just to add to that, I was just going to say how you mentioned, Michael, how the idea behind incrementality is simple, but it's actually very complex, and I completely agree. I think the more you think about the details around incrementality and how to design an experiment, the data that goes into those modules, etc., it's actually more complex than you think, and you have to make decisions along the way. What do you value the most? Is it preciseness, accuracy? Is it simplicity? There are so many aspects that you have to consider beyond just the model you use. And with the landscape constantly changing, and it will continue to change, we're going to have to adapt as we go along. So an exciting space to be within.
And I think what Michael said also as well, I mean, this is a never-ending process. I think the mistake, the big mistake that people can make is assume you get to a certain point and then that's it. Never happens. This is something that constantly, it's part because of the changes that are coming through, but also as well, bear in mind that, you may feel as though it's embedded, but often people have to be reminded of this. So there needs to be that constant communication and conversation going on.
Yeah. Okay. Also, good advice for that. Ian, maybe also one more point for you, because in preparing that, we also discussed a little bit about the metric to measure in the end, and we're often talking about return on invest or return on ad spend, and you mentioned that might not be the best metric, actually. So maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, this is very much coming from a sort of financial analyst standpoint. The problem with sort of particularly things ROAS and ROI is that what can happen is it can really sort of incentivize a short-term focus when it comes to advertising spend, just by the way that the metric calculations are. Now, what that therefore means is they can therefore skew advertising spend in a certain direction that's not necessarily at the best for the firm longer term. Typically, what I tend to suggest is that actually sort of if you're going to look particularly for brand sort of advertising spending, a better calculation to use is what we call a discounted cash flow model, which essentially sort of looks over the medium term as to both the investments, but also as well the returns that you get, and also takes into account what we call the time value of money. And what I mean by that, the time value of money, is quite simply £1 today is going to be worth a lot more than £1 in 5 years' time, just simply because of the impact of inflation. And I think with a model like that, what it allows you to do is really sort of capture the full long-term benefits of that investment. Now, every single sort of way that you do a calculation, every single sort of metric that you use will have its pluses and minuses. ROI, ROAS, they're very, very simple to use. And they're very quick, and that explains a lot of its of their popularity. The flip side of that often is that, as I said, it can distort the outcome. So I think for advertisers and marketers, I think sort of looking at a better range of options in terms of which valuation metrics they use would also be recommended as well.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, I hope that might also help people from finance teams who might listen to this to also learn a little bit more about the metrics. Brilliant. Thanks everyone for your insights. What we like to do at the end of this podcast is to actually collect some key takeaways. So what do you think are the most important points that the audience, both marketers and finance teams, should take from this one? Please share the points you find most important. Michael, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about culture, and it may sound a bit sort of like soft, but it really is so important to have people meeting the whole time, talking to each other, all that kind of thing. I think without that, I think Ian made the point earlier, that sort of like optimization loop, which should last, as long as the business lasts. That is what that is based on. So I think at Farfetch, we do a really good job of having that culture of finance and marketing being teams that are very much intertwined. And yeah, I think as long as we continue on that, I think our marketing measurement will just get better and better, and those relationships will get better and better. So yeah, I think that's the sort of main one for me.
Thank you. Ian, you want to go next?
Sure. So talk, communicate, sort of explain. Also as well, when it comes to your workings, there's a great quote by Abraham Lincoln that says, if I've got sort of 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend 5 hours sharpening the axe. Point being with that is that essentially sort of preparation, sort of how you work through things, and making sure that essentially sort of you've got all the process and the inputs right, and you can explain them and they're as solid as you can make them. It's crucial, because that's the sort of thing that will build up trust, particularly amongst finance teams.
Thank you. I like that quote very much as well. Gabi, what's your key takeaways?
I think a very practical one, actually. I think use the data you have. I think most advertisers sit on a wealth of data that they don't necessarily use. They use historical data to quantify that gap and challenge the models you use, question why you use them and what they actually do. And talk to teams, talk to finance, for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I believe and hope this was another inspiring episode and we could provide helpful guidance. Again, dear listeners, feel free to share with your finance teams if you'd like them to learn more about that. Thanks so much, Michael, Ian, and Gabi, for all your brilliant input here. And of course, thanks to the community for tuning in. As always, if you found it helpful and inspiring, please subscribe, share, and stay tuned for the next episodes. Bye.